They were never meant to be read. Not by us. Not in this time. Buried in the ground, locked in sealed chambers, hidden in libraries where no ordinary traveler could wander, these texts were written for a reason. Not as stories, not as entertainment, but as warnings. Long before science, before telescopes, before weather satellites, there were those who claimed they could see further than the horizon, into a future none of their people could imagine. They described fire tearing through the skies, oceans swallowing entire coasts, winters that would not end, and plagues that left no one untouched. And they wrote it all down. But here is the question you will not be able to shake. How could they have known? How could someone thousands of years ago with nothing but ink, stone, or clay describe events that match our modern world with unnerving precision? Were they guessing? Or did they see something? Some of these ancient writings have already proven chillingly accurate, predicting disasters that came centuries after the author's death. Others still carry lines describing events that haven't happened yet. And that's where the true fear lies. If their past predictions were correct, what does that say about the ones still waiting? History has tried to smother them. Some prophecies were declared heresy and destroyed. Others were hidden by rulers who feared public panic. Entire temples were burned to stop the words from spreading. And still, somehow they survived, waiting in silence, waiting for someone to read them again. Imagine holding one of those pages in your hands. Imagine reading words that match the headlines of today. Would you dismiss them as coincidence? Or would you start to wonder if every disaster we face was already written? These warnings were not vague poetry. They carried dates, instructions, and symbols so detailed that modern historians have struggled to explain them away. Some speak of a black rain falling over kingdoms, centuries before anyone could describe nuclear fallout. Others tell of beasts of metal roaming the earth, millennia before the first machines existed. And there's another layer, one far more unsettling. Many of these ancient texts do not read like prophecy. They read like memory, as if the writer was not imagining the future, but remembering it. Could they have been survivors of an older, forgotten civilization? One that had already lived through these events once before? If that's true, then perhaps these disasters are not random at all. Perhaps they are part of a cycle, one we are not escaping, only repeating. Tonight we are opening those sealed pages. You will hear the words exactly as they were written. You will see how they match events both past and present. And by the time we reach the final page, you may not want to know what comes next. Because once you hear a warning, you can't pretend you didn't. So I'll ask you one last question before we begin. When an ancient voice calls out from the shadows of history, telling you what's about to come, do you listen? Or do you turn the page and hope they were wrong? We're about to find out. It was not found in a vault, nor in a museum archive, but deep beneath the ruins of a city long erased from memory. Nineveh, once the jewel of an empire, had been reduced to rubble and sand. For nearly 3 millennia, its secrets lay in silence. Then, in the late 19th century, archaeologists digging through the ancient dust uncovered something strange. Not gold, not weapons, but a single clay tablet, cracked down the middle as though something had tried to split it apart. The markings across its surface were unmistakable. Cuneiform, the earliest known form of writing, pressed into wet clay by the hands of a Sumerian scribe thousands of years ago. Most tablets from the era spoke of trade, taxes, or religious hymns. This one did not. When translators began their work, the first line seemed harmless enough. References to the gods, to omens in the night sky. But then they reached a passage that made them stop. It read, "The heavens shall roar, and the fire shall eat the shadows." The words were violent, unsettling, and far too vivid to be dismissed as simple religious poetry. The text continued, describing a stone of iron that descended from the stars, tearing the sky in two, trailing fire behind it. A blast so great it flattened all life in its path. A darkness that lingered for days. At first, scholars argued it could have been a description of a volcanic eruption or a great city fire. But the more they examined the language, the less sense those theories made. The Sumerians had detailed words for volcanoes, lightning, and storms. None of them were used here. Instead, the imagery matched something far rarer, something they should have had no way to understand: a meteor impact. Modern science would later confirm a disturbing parallel. Geological evidence shows that around 3,600 years ago, the region experienced an airburst event, a massive explosion caused by a meteor entering Earth's atmosphere at incredible speed. The blast would have been more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, flattening buildings, scorching the ground, and creating shock waves felt for hundreds of miles. But how could the Sumerians have described this so precisely? How could they know of a stone of iron from the stars without telescopes or the concept of outer space? Some historians believe the tablet was not a prediction but a record of an event the Sumerians, or their ancestors, had already survived. That possibility opens a darker question. Was this disaster part of a recurring cycle? Had such events happened before? And could they happen again? Because this tablet contains one more detail, a line so cryptic that most publications never mention it. It says, "It shall return when the darkness covers the land and the rivers turn to dust." What did the scribe mean? Was this purely symbolic language, or an exact set of conditions for the next strike? Darkness covers the land could refer to an eclipse, a volcanic winter, or even the smoke of modern warfare. Rivers turn to dust might mean drought, climate collapse, or poison water sources. And here is the most unnerving part. As we read this today, rivers across the world are drying. Regions once fed by glaciers are seeing their waterways shrink into barren beds of cracked earth. The symbolism, if symbolism is all it is, feels too close for comfort. Some archaeologists dismiss these connections as coincidence, insisting the text is mythologized memory, a way for ancient people to explain a catastrophe they didn't understand. But even if that's true, it still leaves one final, haunting thought. If the Sumerians had witnessed a meteor strike once before, what stopped it from happening again? We are left with a choice: treat the Sumerian tablet as an artifact of superstition, or as an alarm bell from the deep past. But if it's the latter, the countdown it began may still be ticking. And when the sky burns again, will we be any more prepared than they were? It began with a scream, not from the lips of a dying man, but from the wind itself. The scroll's first line says the sound rolled down from the mountains like the cry of 1,000 beasts. And that was the moment, it claimed, that the sky began to die. The scroll in question was discovered in the crumbling archives of Delphi, Greece, wrapped in linen so fragile it disintegrated at a touch. It was not a public prophecy. It had been hidden in a sealed clay jar alongside temple offerings, almost as if someone had wanted to bury it where no one would find it. Its author? Unknown. But the handwriting matched records kept by a scribe trained in the service of the Pythia, the high priestess who delivered the visions of Apollo. Normally, her prophecies were cryptic, half-poems meant to be interpreted by kings. This one was different. It read like a direct warning: the warmth will flee the earth. The seas will harden. The soil will refuse its seed. And the moon shall watch the silence. The description was vivid enough to match something we now know all too well: nuclear winter, or perhaps the aftermath of a massive volcanic eruption. Both would blot out the sun with a veil of dust, dropping global temperatures, killing crops, and collapsing civilizations. The scroll even mentions a time frame. 3 harvests will fail, then the 4th will not come. If this is literal, it means 4 years without viable agriculture, long enough to erase entire populations. Skeptics have long claimed the scroll was simply a dramatized account of past famines, nothing more. But here's where the unease turns to alarm. In 536 AD, Byzantine historians recorded a strange year when the sun gave no light, and the air grew cold even in summer. Scientists today believe it was caused by a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland, that spread an ash cloud across the globe. Crops failed. Starvation spread. Empires crumbled. The oracle's scroll, however, dates to centuries before this event, which means either it was predicting something far in the future, or it was describing something even older that has since been erased from history. There's more. In the margins of the parchment, faint but still visible, are symbols not found in standard Greek writing. Spirals, jagged lines, and what appear to be snowflakes surrounding a blackened sun. Researchers have debated their meaning for decades. Were they artistic flourishes? Or coded instructions, perhaps a warning on how to survive the cold? One translation, though disputed, claims a note beneath the symbols reads, "The fire must be hidden until the silence ends." What does that mean? Store food? Stockpile fuel? Or something else entirely, something only the initiates of the oracle's temple understood? And then there is the final sentence, written in darker ink as though it was added later. "The cold will come again when men burn the sky." It is here that the scroll steps across centuries and looks directly at us. Because burning the sky could be read as pure metaphor, or as a chillingly accurate description of modern humanity's actions. We burn forests. We burn coal. We burn fuel in the millions of tons. We have, in a sense, burned the very air we breathe. That if the oracle's vision was more than poetry, then perhaps the endless winter is not some relic of the past, but the shadow of what's still ahead. And if the scroll's timing is correct, 3 failed harvests, then the 4th that never comes. By the time we realize it's happening, it will already be too late. The first page was already damaged when they opened it. A dark stain spread across the corner, almost like something had burned its way into the fibers of the bark paper. But what remained was enough to send a ripple of unease through every researcher in the room. This was no ordinary relic. It was a fragment of one of the lost Mayan codices, discovered in a hidden chamber beneath the ruins of a temple in the Yucatan. The chamber's walls were painted with scenes of jaguars, celestial glyphs, and figures holding torches beneath a sky streaked with red. The codex itself was folded like an accordion, covered in symbols that spoke of calendars, star positions, and a single repeating image, a serpent coiled around the sun. The Mayans were master astronomers. They tracked Venus with astonishing precision. They built cities aligned with equinoxes. They knew the language of the heavens. But this codex was not a celebration of the stars. It was a warning point. One passage stood out, once translated. "When the serpent swallows the sun, the fire will walk the earth and the seas will boil." What could serpent swallowing the sun mean? An eclipse? A comet? A solar flare? The debate still rages. But then came the unsettling detail. Next to this line was a number, written in the Mayan long count calendar. When converted, it pointed to a date shockingly close to our own era. The imagery was relentless. Rivers of flame, cities dissolving into ash, people fleeing as the sky bled for 3 days. One panel showed what looked disturbingly like chunks of rock falling from the heavens, smashing into water that erupted in steam. Was this a volcanic eruption? A meteor storm? Or something far stranger? But the most haunting question is this: why was the codex hidden? Mayan codices were usually kept for ceremonial use, displayed to record astronomical knowledge and religious rites. This one was buried in a sealed chamber, along with offerings that suggested it was part of a ritual, perhaps one meant to delay or even prevent what it described. Did the priests believe that by hiding it, they were protecting future generations from the knowledge it contained? Even stranger, modern solar scientists have confirmed that the Mayans' serpent glyph could represent a massive coronal mass ejection, a burst of solar plasma that, if aimed directly at Earth, could destroy satellites, wipe out power grids, and disrupt the planet's climate. The Mayans should not have known about such phenomena in such detail. Yet here it was, drawn with terrifying accuracy centuries before the technology to detect it existed. And then there's the missing piece. The last panel of the codex is torn clean away, leaving only a ragged edge and a few stray glyphs, symbols for sky, darkness, and rebirth. Was the ending lost to time, or was it removed deliberately, perhaps because it contained the exact date or instructions for what would follow? One researcher reportedly found a faint handprint on the back of the last page, pressed into the paper before the ink had fully dried. Was it the mark of the scribe who made it? Or a seal of ownership, a message to anyone who dared to unfold it? So here's the question that lingers. If the Mayan Codex truly was a countdown, has it already reached zero, and we simply haven't noticed? Or is it still ticking, waiting for the moment when the serpent swallows the sun again? And when that moment comes, will we be ready? The water was gone. Not just low. Not just muddy. Gone in its place. A jagged ribbon of cracked earth twisted through the desert, the bones of fish and crocodiles bleaching under a sun that seemed far too close. The people in the prophecy screamed not from thirst alone, but from the stench, the air thick with decay, the Nile reduced to nothing but a grave. These aren't images from a modern drought. They are the opening lines of an Egyptian papyrus so old that it predates the reign of Ramses II. Found in a sealed stone jar beneath the floor of a collapsed storehouse in Thebes, it had been folded into a brittle, almost petrified sheet. On its surface, written in sharp, deliberate hieratic script, was what Egyptologists first thought to be a poetic lament. They were wrong. The papyrus is now referred to, by those who dare to speak of it at all, as the scroll of the drying river. His words are not random. They move like a tide, building into a grim warning. The great river shall vanish, and the land will wear the crown of dust. The mouths of children will open and find no drink. The earth will crack until it swallows the dead. The Nile was life for Egypt. Every kingdom's power rose and fell with its floods. The idea of it vanishing would have been unthinkable to those who lived along its banks. And yet, this papyrus describes not a seasonal low, but a complete disappearance, an event so total that it reads like the end of an era. Some believe the scroll was inspired by a particularly harsh drought in Egypt's history. But several details don't fit. It speaks of rains of ash, and 3 nights without stars, suggesting atmospheric conditions beyond normal climate change. Others point to volcanic eruptions or even the impact of a distant meteor stirring enough dust to blot out the sky. But the most unsettling section is one that most translations omit, a set of conditions that would herald the river's death that it lists. The foreign kings will drink from her headwaters. The stone paths will shine without heat. The birds will flee before the season changes. What could these mean? Foreign kings drinking from her headwaters might hint at upstream control, dams, diversions, political disputes over water. Stone paths shining without heat could describe modern roads under the glare of streetlights. And birds fleeing before the season changes sounds eerily like the disrupted migration patterns scientists report today. That here's where it gets darker. Radiocarbon dating places the papyrus's creation over 3,200 years ago. But a faded annotation on the back, written by a later scribe, warns, "The river will die again in the time of iron birds." Iron birds. The phrase should have no place in ancient Egypt. And yet, it sits there waiting for interpretation. Could it be a metaphor for war, fighter jets, aerial bombers? Or is it describing something even more literal? And if the scribe was correct, then the papyrus isn't just recounting the past, it's describing a cycle. A repeating catastrophe that returns when certain signs appear. Today, sections of the Nile already run dangerously low. Upstream projects are changing its flow. Climate shifts are altering rainfall across the region. And birds, they've begun to vanish from migration routes they've used for centuries. Coincidence? Or is the scroll of the drying river whispering across millennia, telling us that the countdown has already begun? If the Nile, the eternal heart of Egypt, could truly vanish once before, then maybe its death is not a question of if, only when. The sky bled crimson. A cold so sharp it felt like knives scraped across exposed skin settled over the land. Trees twisted into grotesque silhouettes against a darkening horizon, their branches clawing at the thickening gloom. The sun had vanished, or so it seemed, as an unnatural nightfall swallowed the world whole. For days there was no dawn. The animals grew restless, howling into the void, their eyes wide with terror. Rivers slowed, turning sluggish and thick like molten glass. The wind carried whispers, eerie murmurs that seemed almost like voices lost between worlds. This wasn't a storm. It wasn't winter. It was something far worse. This terrifying scene comes straight from a weathered set of Norse runes etched into stone tablets found beneath the frozen soil of Scandinavia, buried deep inside a cave whose entrance was guarded by ancient symbols warning all who dared enter. These runes were more than mere writing. They were warnings passed down by seers who claimed to have glimpsed a darkness that would devour the sun itself, a time they called Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. But these tablets reveal something even more chilling. One inscription reads, "When the fire falls from the sky and the sun hides her face, the world will shiver in endless night. The rivers will freeze and men's hearts will harden like the ice beneath their feet." For centuries, scholars debated whether Ragnarok was myth or metaphor. But these runes are specific, too specific to be dismissed as legend. The phrase "fire falls from the sky" aligns uncannily with the descriptions of meteor showers and comet impacts recorded elsewhere in history. Yet what unsettles researchers most is the mention of a sun that hides her face for an unbroken stretch of time, plunging the earth into darkness. Could this be a reference to an atmospheric phenomenon? A volcanic winter caused by ash so thick it blot out the sun? Or, more terrifyingly, a solar event that temporarily disrupts the sun's light? In the margins of these tablets, faint scratchings resemble a tally, counting days of darkness. 3-7-12. But the final mark is missing, wiped away or destroyed. Why? Because the last entry might have contained the duration of this apocalyptic night, and the consequences that would follow. But there's more. A lesser-known line warns, "When iron beasts take flight and thunder echoes across the skies, the endless night will come once more." Iron beasts taking flight. The phrase strikes like a thunderclap in modern ears. Could the ancient Norse have prophesied airplanes, jets, or missiles? Or is it a cryptic way to describe aerial warfare, a darkness born not of nature but of human hands? As we watch our skies fill with drones and hear the distant roar of fighter jets, the prophecy grows more unnerving. If the darkness foretold by these runes is tied to iron beasts, then it's not a distant myth, it's a warning for our era. And here's the final question that chills the bone. If the sun hides her face again and the endless night falls, will humanity survive the cold silence that follows? Or will we become the lost souls of an age swallowed by darkness, just as the Norse seers warned? The air was thick with dust and the silence of centuries. As the archaeologist's hand brushed away the final layer of sand, something fragile emerged, an ancient scroll, curled and brittle, yet somehow preserved beneath the desert's unforgiving heat. No one knew what secrets it held. No one knew what darkness had swallowed it whole. Then the words appeared, written in Hebrew yet strange, older and stranger than any language known to scholars, were lines that sent a chill down every spine who dared read them. "The light shall fade beyond the horizon, and the earth will tremble beneath the weight of shadows. The seas will recede, and the stars will vanish one by one. The Dead Sea Scrolls, a treasure trove of ancient texts, had revealed countless mysteries. But this particular fragment, found in a previously undiscovered cave near Qumran, was unlike any other. It was not scripture, not prophecy in the usual sense. It was a warning. Scholars tried to place it in time, but the ink was so faded, and the parchment so worn, that dating it proved nearly impossible. The script contained symbols that didn't match any known alphabet, resembling cryptic glyphs interspersed with the Hebrew words, a code or language lost to history. What did the vanishing light mean? Was it metaphorical, speaking of spiritual darkness? Or a literal warning about the sun dimming, stars disappearing from the night? Science has shown that the Earth's magnetic field, which shields us from deadly cosmic radiation, has weakened and shifted over centuries. Could this scroll have been a record from a time when those changes caused the sky itself to seem different? The scroll also describes Earth trembling beneath shadows, which some experts interpret as earthquakes preceded by darkness, or volcanic ash blocking sunlight before tremors devastate the land. One line stands out, written in a darker ink as if added in haste or desperation. When the light fades, the lost shall rise, but only the watchers will see. Who are these lost? Spirits? The dead? Survivors of a calamity? And who are the watchers? A secret sect. The descendants of those who hid the scroll? Most haunting is the final phrase, barely legible, almost erased by time. Prepare, for the shadow shall come again, and no flame will hold it back. In a world where power grids fail at the slightest disruption, where wildfires rage uncontrollably, and where darkness can descend without warning, this ancient warning strikes with unnerving clarity. Did those who wrote the scroll witness a calamity that will return? Or were they gifted, or cursed, with knowledge of a future we're only now approaching? If the vanishing light is not a myth, but a cycle, what happens when it returns? Will we be ready to face the shadows this time? Silence. Not the peaceful kind that soothes the soul, but a heavy, suffocating void, the kind that presses in from all sides, drowning out cries, erasing footsteps, swallowing life itself. This silence wasn't natural. It was the final curse etched into a stone tablet buried beneath the ruins of a city lost to time, somewhere deep in the deserts of Central America. The tablet was discovered by a lone explorer who, according to his own journals, barely escaped with his life. The stone was inscribed with glyphs unlike any known Mayan or Aztec script, ancient, angular, and fractured, almost as if carved by a hand that trembled in fear. Its message was chilling and cryptic. When the voices fall silent and the walls breathe no more, the city shall be forgotten, and with it, the light of men. This silent city is not named, but clues suggest it was a thriving metropolis whose sudden disappearance baffled historians for centuries. Archaeologists unearthed traces of a bustling trade hub, temples, and marketplaces, only to find layers of ash, collapsed buildings, and no sign of the population. It was as if the entire city had simply vanished. Was this the work of war? Disease? Natural disaster? Or something far darker? The tablet hints at a curse, a prophecy that doomed the city to vanish from memory itself, a fate worse than death. Oblivion. A passage beneath the warning reads, "The sky will crack open, fire will rain, and rivers will turn to stone. The earth will swallow their cries, and no song will rise again." These are words of apocalypse, but also of erasure, of a past wiped clean so no one can learn from it. Here is the terrifying question. If such a fate befell one city, could it be waiting for us? Could history repeat in ways we cannot even imagine? The tablet also contains what appears to be a date, a sequence of symbols interpreted as a celestial alignment forecasted for the near future. Experts disagree whether it points to the coming decade or the next century, but none dismiss its warning lightly. Some believe this prophecy is a message from an ancient civilization that knew secrets long buried, secrets about cycles of destruction that reset the world and erase entire histories. And then there's the last line, a final sentence scrawled in haste, almost illegible: "Beware the silence, for in it the past dies and the future waits to be claimed." If the silent city's fate is a warning, what does it mean for us, living in a world filled with noise, screens, and endless chatter? Could silence be the real danger, a void that swallows not just sound but memory, identity, and hope? As you listen to this last prophecy, consider this. Are we the watchers or the forgotten? Is our story being written or erased? The ancient voices call out through the ages, their warnings as sharp as the day they were carved. But what we choose to do next may determine whether those warnings become reality. Will we heed the ancient texts before the next disaster strikes? Or will we fall silent, like the city lost beneath the sands of time? The answer is waiting in the shadows. The pages have been turned, the voices from the past have whispered their dark truths, ancient texts buried in dust and silence, prophecies carved in stone, inked on fragile scrolls, have spoken of disasters we thought were beyond their time. But time has a cruel way of folding in on itself. Events once dismissed as myth or coincidence now creep ever closer to the edge of reality. What if these were not merely stories? What if they were warnings, urgent, desperate, meant to be heard before it was too late? The question that remains is not if disaster will strike again, but when? And what will we do when the sky burns, the rivers dry, and darkness falls like a shroud? Will we listen to the echoes of those who came before? Or will we ignore the signs and become lost to history, like the silent city swallowed by time? The choice lies with us. Because some warnings can be avoided, but none can be forgotten. Look to the skies, to the rivers, to the shifting earth beneath your feet. The ancient prophecies are watching, and so, perhaps, should we.